The Siberian sky didn't just darken, it shattered. One moment, pale dawn light touched the endless white. The next, a jagged tear ripped across the heavens, spitting fire and screaming metal. A small silver pod, no bigger than a snowmobile, slammed into the frozen tundra miles from Elias Vance's lonely research outpost. The impact shook the ground like a giant's fist, throwing up a violent geyser of snow and black ice. Smoke, thick and greasy, coiled into the frigid air. Silence followed, a deep, heavy silence, broken only by the dying groan of twisted metal and the relentless sigh of the Arctic wind inside the cramped outpost. Elias froze. His coffee mug slipped from numb fingers, shattering on the wooden floor. Not a meteor, too slow, too controlled. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden quiet. He was alone out here, studying Arctic fox migrations, a quiet man seeking peace after a life that felt too loud. This wasn't peace. This was trouble falling from the sky. Grabbing his thickest parka, scarf, and mittens, Elias plunged into the world of white. The cold was a physical blow, stealing his breath, stinging his exposed cheeks. Knee-deep snow slowed him, each step a battle. The wind howled, biting through layers of wool and down. He trudged towards the distant plume of smoke, his boots crunching on the frozen crust, the only sound besides the wind's mournful song. Fear was a cold stone in his gut, but curiosity, the scientist's stubborn pull, dragged him forward. What was it? Debris, something worse. As he neared the impact site, the smell hit him. Burnt plastic, ozone, and something sharp, alien, like crushed pine needles, mixed with lightning. The pod lay half buried in snow, its smooth surface scarred and blackened, steam rising where it met the frozen earth. One side was crumpled like foil. No lights flashed, no hatches opened, just silence, thick and waiting. Elias approached cautiously, his breath fogging wildly. He scanned the empty horizon, nothing but endless white dunes, under a bruised sky. No rescue, no backup. He was it. Taking a deep, shaky breath that burned his lungs, he peered through a jagged crack in the pod's viewport. Inside, nestled in a cradle of glowing blue fibers, was a child, but not his world's child. She was impossibly small, barely the length of his forearm. Smooth, pale gray skin covered her tiny frame. Large, luminous eyes, the deep purple of twilight violets, blinked open slowly. They were huge, taking up most of her delicate face, fringed with dark lashes. Delicate fingers, tipped with tiny claws, clutched a cracked device that pulsed with faint, dying light. Her breathing was shallow, rapid like a trapped bird's. She looked fragile, breakable, utterly lost. Ilias's scientific mind reeled. Not human, definitely not. Panic warred with a sudden, fierce surge of protectiveness. He fumbled for tools, his thick mittens clumsy, finally prying the viewport open with a wrench. Cold air rushed in, making the tiny figure shiver violently. He reached in, his huge, calloused hand trembling. Gently, so gently, he scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, a whisper of warmth against the Arctic chill. Her skin was cool, like smooth river stone, but alive. Her large eyes fixed on his face, wide with fear. And then, slowly, with something else, recognition, hope. She lifted one tiny hand, impossibly brave, and touched his frost-streamed cheek. Her touch was light as a snowflake, yet it sent a jolt through him. Then, the cracked device at her side flared weakly. A voice emerged, not from the device, but seemingly from her, soft, melodic, like tiny bells ringing in a quiet room. It spoke perfect, simple English. "Congratulations," it chimed, the words clear and bright against the vast silence. "You're my new husband." Elias jerked back as if burned. His boots slipped on the ice, nearly dropping her. What?" he stammered, his voice rough with shock and cold. "Husband? No, I don't understand. You're hurt. You need help. The tiny alien girl just giggled, a sound like wind through crystal. She snuggled deeper into the crook of his arm, her tiny fingers curling trustingly around his thumb. Her enormous purple eyes held his, filled with a startling, innocent certainty. You found me? She explained, her voice warm with conviction. That means you're my mate. It's written in the stars. My people call it Jarvet, the bond of first contact. She patted his chest with her other hand, a gesture both absurd and heartbreakingly earnest. Don't worry, big skyman, I'll take good care of you. Elias stood frozen in the snowstorm of his own confusion, the biting cold, the vast emptiness, the impossible weight in his arms. It all crashed over him. This tiny, fragile being, fallen from a broken sky, had just declared him her husband. It was insane. It was terrifying. It made absolutely no sense yet, as he looked down at her, at the trust in those huge alien eyes. The way she instinctively sought his warmth against the deadly cold, the cold stone of fear in his gut, began to melt, replaced by something warmer, heavier, and far more complicated. A responsibility he never asked for, landing softly, impossibly, in his hands. The wind whipped snow around them, the smoke from the pod faded into the gray sky, and the quiet biologist from Earth knew, with a sudden, bone-deep certainty, that his lonely life in the snow was over, forever. He held the tiny alien girl closer, a silent promise forming in the frozen air between them, even as his mind still screamed, "What have I done?" The stars above, indifferent and ancient, held their silence. But down in the snow, a new story had just begun. Back at the cramped outpost, Elias felt utterly lost. The howling wind outside seemed quieter than the storm inside his head. Husband, the word echoed, absurd and terrifying. He gently placed the tiny alien girl, Lyra, onto his cot. She shivered, her large purple eyes, wide with exhaustion, but still holding that strange, trusting certainty. Her cracked translator device lay silent on the blanket. Okay, Elias muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. First things first. Warmth. Safety. He wasn't a hero. He was a biologist who studied foxes. But seeing her, so small and vulnerable against the rough wool blanket, something primal kicked in. He dug out his softest spare thermal shirt, lining a small cardboard box. He positioned a low-wattage heat lamp nearby, careful not to overheat the fragile creature. He filled a tiny medicine cup with warm water, the closest thing he had to a bottle. Here, he said softly, holding it near her. Drink this. Lyra blinked slowly, then reached out with delicate fingers. She didn't drink like a human baby. Instead, she placed her tiny hands on the cup, closed her eyes, and a soft, internal light pulsed within her chest. The water seemed to rise towards her, vanishing as if absorbed through her skin. She sighed, a sound of pure relief, her shivering stopping. Elias stared, amazed. Not drinking, absorbing moisture. His scientific mind tried to grasp it. But the immediate relief in her small frame was what mattered. Over the next few days, Lyra amazed him. Her translator device, once recharged with Ilias's jury-rigged power source, began working properly. Her English was perfect, clear, and carried a gentle, musical lilt. She learned fast. Within hours, she knew the outpost's layout. Within a day, she was naming tools Elias used. This is wrench, she'd chirp, pointing her tiny finger. This is screwdriver. Big Skyman needs help. One morning, the outpost's ancient generator sputtered and died, plunging them into cold silence. Elias groaned, pulling on his boots for the 100th time to face the freezing engine shed. He returned, hands numb, oil smudged on his face, muttering about faulty wiring. Lyra perched on the edge of the cot watching him, tilted her head. Without a word, she hopped down, landing silently on the wooden floor. She waddled over to the generator, her small body dwarfed by the machine. She placed both hands on the cold metal casing, closed her eyes, and that soft internal light pulsed again, brighter this time. A faint hum filled the room. Elias watched, stunned, as the generator coughed, then roared back to life, smoother than it had run in years. "Fixed," Lyra announced, turning to him with a proud grin, her tiny chest heaving slightly from the effort. Elias knelt, his throat tight. How did you do that?" Lyra tapped her temple. "Violani sea energy, like colors. Broken lines, easy to mend." She climbed onto his knee, a gesture so natural it startled him. "You cold, I warm you." She placed her small, cool hand against his cheek. A wave of soothing warmth spread through him, melting the last of the shed's chill. It wasn't fire. It was deep, comforting heat, like sunlight on snow. He started calling her kiddo, a habit from his younger, less lonely days. Lyra loved it. She'd beam, her whole tiny body seeming to glow. "Kiddo," she'd echo happily. And she called him my big skyman, a title that slowly stopped sounding ridiculous and started feeling right. It was a name filled with pure, uncomplicated affection. Then came the fever. A brutal Arctic cold snapped Elias hard. He burned with heat, shivered violently under thick blankets, his head pounding. He drifted in and out of consciousness, the world a blur of pain and cold sweat. At one point, delirious, he thought he saw Lyra standing on the edge of his cot, her small form silhouetted against the dim light. He felt her tiny hands press against his forehead. Then, she began to hum. It wasn't a song he knew. It was a low, resonant vibration, a sound that seemed to come from deep within her core, not her throat. It filled the small room, warm and steady as a heartbeat. The sound didn't just enter his ears. It seemed to seep into his bones, calming the frantic drumming of his pulse, easing the ache in his muscles. The fever's sharp edge softened, the chills lessened. He sank into a deep, healing sleep, the gentle hum his only lullaby. When he woke hours later, cool and clear-headed, Lyra was curled asleep on his chest, her breathing soft and even. The fever was gone, completely. He carefully lifted her, cradling her like the most precious thing in the frozen world, and carried her back to her warm box nest. As he tucked the thermal shirt around her, watching her peaceful sleep, a wave of emotion crashed over him, fierce protectiveness, deep gratitude, and something else. Something warm and solid he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. He sat back, the silence of the outpost now comforting, not lonely. The Veilani enforcer's words from the radio transmission echoed in his mind. "You are emotionally compromised. The bond is invalid." He looked at Lyra, her tiny chest rising and falling. The being who fixed his generator, warmed his fever, and called him family. Invalid? The thought felt hollow, wrong. She wasn't a program following a ritual. She was Lyra. She saw him. She cared, and he cared back. Deeply he reached out, not touching her now, but just resting his hand near her little nest. The absurd declaration, "Congratulations, you're my new husband," no longer felt like a joke or a trap. It felt like the beginning of something real. Something fragile, yes, but fiercely bright in the endless white. The vast, indifferent tundra outside suddenly felt less empty. Because here, in this small, warm space, with this tiny being who mended broken things and sang away fevers, Elias Vance didn't feel alone anymore. He felt chosen. And as he watched her sleep, a quiet certainty settled in his heart, warmer than any heat lamp. This isn't wrong. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The question wasn't, was this so wrong, anymore. It was, how could he ever let her go? The stars outside might be cold, but inside the outpost, a new kind of warmth had taken root. The silence after Elias smashed the radio antenna was worse than the static. It wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a man holding his breath underwater, waiting for the inevitable pull of the current. He stood outside the outpost, snow stinging, his raw hands staring at the broken pieces of metal and wires scattered in the snow. What have I done? The thought hammered in his skull like a trapped bird. He'd just defied an alien empire. For a tiny creature who called him husband. For a child who fixed generators and sang fevers away. Inside, Lyra sat very still on the cot. She hadn't cried. She hadn't shouted. She just watched him with those huge amethyst eyes that usually held starlight, now clouded with a fear too deep for her small frame. When Elias stepped back inside, covered in snow, she didn't run to him. She stayed curled up, her thin arms wrapped around her knees. The warmth of the heat lamp seemed to bounce off her, unable to reach the coldness inside. Big Sky Man, her voice was a whisper, barely louder than the wind scratching at the windows. They will come. Elias knelt beside the cot, his knees cracking in the cold. Maybe not, he lied, his voice rough. Maybe they didn't hear. Lyra shook her head slowly. A single tear, glowing faintly blue, traced a path down her gray cheek. They always hear. The Jarveth bond. It's not just words, it's a signal. Like a heartbeat in the dark. She looked up at him, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. They'll take me back to the nest, to the cold rooms. Her voice dropped to a thread. They'll erase me, make me blank. So I don't remember the snow, or the tree outside, or, she swallowed hard, or you. The words hit Elias like a physical blow. He saw it then, not just fear, but grief. The grief of a child who knew she was about to lose her home, his home, their home. He reached out, but she flinched. Not away from him, but toward him, burying her face against his chest, with a sob that shook her whole body. I don't want you hurt, she cried, her small fists clutching his shirt. Please, Big Skyman, let them take me. Elias held her tighter, his own throat burning. He thought of her humming him back from fever, her tiny hands mending the generator, the way she'd beam when he called her kiddo. This wasn't a specimen, this was Lyra, his Lyra, the one who made the lonely outpost feel like a home, the one who saw him not just the quiet biologist, but the man who needed her as much as she needed him. No, he said, his voice low but steady. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. Snow still clung to his eyebrows, melting into his stubble. You listen to me, you are not property, you are not a unit. You're Lyra, you're my family, and family doesn't get erased. He wiped her blue tear with his thumb, the warmth of her skin seeping into his calloused finger. I don't care who's coming, I won't let them take you. Lyra stared at him, her breath hitching. For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes, bright and fragile as a snowflake. Then, she pressed her ear against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Your heart is loud, she murmured, like thunder. Elias managed a shaky smile. Yeah, it's scared, but it's yours. They didn't sleep that night. Elias built a fire in the old wood stove, feeding it chunk by chunk while Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, her small hands resting on the generator's casing. She wasn't fixing it, she was feeling it, her eyes closed, her chest pulsing with that soft golden light. I'm making it strong, she whispered, for when they come. Elias didn't ask how she knew they'd come. He felt it too, a pressure in the air, a stillness in the wind, like the world was holding its breath. He checked the shotgun he kept for wolves, useless against spaceships, but it made him feel less helpless. He packed a small bag, protein bars, a first aid kit, Lyra's favorite soft blanket. Where would we run? The thought was madness. The tundra stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Dawn came gray and heavy. Elias stood at the window, Lyra perched on his shoulder like a small, gray bird. Her tiny fingers were cold against his neck. Outside, the snow lay smooth and unbroken. The world looked empty, peaceful. Then the sky changed, not with clouds, not with light, but with absence. A vast, silent shadow slid over the sun. The temperature dropped sharply. The wind died. Even the distant groan of shifting ice stopped. It was as if the Arctic itself had frozen in terror. Ilyas's blood turned to ice. Here they are, above the tundra, hanging impossibly low, was the ship. It wasn't silver like Lyra's pod. It was black deep, matte black, like a hole torn in the sky. Angular and silent, it blocked the sun, casting the snow in a cold, dead twilight. No engines roared, no lights flashed. It simply was a monument to power that made the frozen world beneath it feel like dust. Lyra trembled against him. "The retrieval ship," she breathed, her voice thin with dread. "They're here." A beam of light, sharp and white as a laser, lanced down from the ship's belly. It hit the snow 100 yards from the outpost, forming a perfect circle of shimmering energy. From it stepped 3 figures. They were tall twice Ilyas's height, clad in seamless, black armor that seemed to drink the light. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, featureless masks, but 2 narrow slits glowed a cold, unwavering red. They moved with unnatural silence, gliding across the snow as if weightless. Ilyas didn't think. He grabbed Lyra, tucked her securely inside his parka against his chest, and stepped outside. The cold was a knife, but he barely felt it. He stood between the enforcers and the outpost, his boots sinking into the snow, his heart pounding like a war drum against Lyra's small body. The lead enforcer stopped 10 feet away. Its voice boomed not from the mask, but from the air itself, vibrating in Ilyas's bones. "Unidentified human, you possess Veilani property. Return the unit immediately." Lyra's tiny hands clutched his shirt through the fabric. He felt her silent tears soaking into his thermal layer. Ilyas lifted his chin, his voice raw but clear in the frozen air. "She's not property, she's not a unit, she's a person, and she's mine." The enforcer tilted its head, the red slits narrowing. "Emotional compromise detected. The Jarvith bond is invalid. She was programmed to attach. You are not her equal." Ilyas looked down at the small bump inside his parka, feeling the faint, rapid beat of Lyra's heart against his own. He thought of her humming away his fever, of her calling him kiddo, of the way she made the cold feel warm. He met the red glow of the enforcer's eyes. "She chose me," he said, his voice trembling but unwavering, "and I choose her." He took 1 step forward, the snow crunching under his boot. "If you want her, you'll have to kill me first." The wind stopped. The world held its breath. And in that frozen silence, Ilyas Vance, a quiet man from Earth, stood his ground, ready to die for the tiny alien girl who called him husband. Because sometimes, love isn't about stars or rituals. It's about standing in the snow, heart pounding, and choosing to be brave. For them, it wasn't a gun. It was a smooth black rod that unfolded in its hands, humming with a low, hungry sound. The air around its tip crackled, turning the falling snow to steam inches away. Ilyas didn't flinch. He stood firm, snow swirling round. His boots, Lyra a small, warm weight against his pounding heart inside his parka. He thought of her humming him back from fever, of her tiny hands mending the generator, of the way she called him kiddo. He closed his eyes. "Let it be quick," he prayed. "Let her be safe." Then dash movement. A blur of gray shot from inside his coat. Lyra leaped, not away, but toward the enforcers. She landed lightly in the snow between Ilyas and the weapon, barely taller than the frost clinging to the ground. Her small chest heaved, her purple eyes wide with fear, but burning with something fiercer. "No," she screamed, her voice cutting through the Arctic silence like a bell. "I am not a unit." The lead enforcer paused. The weapon's hum deepened, ready to fire. "Step aside, unit. This is your final command." Lyra didn't step aside. She planted Her tiny feet in the snow raised her hands not in surrender, but in defiance. Her whole body began to glow, not the soft pulse from before, but a fierce golden light erupting from her chest, brighter than the hidden sun. It didn't shine out, it poured into the world, warm and alive, pushing back the ship's cold shadow. "I am alive," she cried, her voice suddenly strong, echoing with a power that didn't belong to her small frame. "I have a heart. I have a choice." The light surged. It hit the enforcers like a physical wave. Their black armor cracked with golden veins, smoking where the light touched. The lead enforcer staggered back, its weapon clattering to the snow, extinguished. The ship above shuddered, groaning like a wounded beast. Ice cracked across the tundra. Snow melted in a perfect circle around Lyra, revealing dark earth beneath. Then, as quickly as it came, the light faded. Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping. Her glow dimmed to a faint ember. She trembled violently, her tiny body spent. The enforcers stood frozen, their masks flickering. The red glow in their eyes dimmed to confused orange dot. Silence, not the heavy silence of fear, but the stunned quiet after lightning strikes. The lead enforcer took a slow, deliberate step forward. It didn't reach for its weapon. Instead, it kneeled in the snow before the tiny figure. The movement was stiff, alien, but unmistakable. "Respect. Core spark," it boomed, the voice softer now, stripped of its mechanical edge. "You awakened the core spark, a child's soul." It tilted its head, the orange glow in its mask, studying Lyra with something like awe. "No Veilani has done this in 10,000 years. Not since the Great Silence." Lyra lifted her head, tears bright blue and glowing streaming down her cheeks. But she wasn't crying from fear. She was crying from relief, from the weight of a lifetime of programming finally shattered. "I blocked the signal," she whispered, her voice raw but clear. "The Jarveth bond. It wasn't just stars. It was me. I chose him." She turned her head, her eyes finding Elias standing frozen behind her. "I chose you, Big Sky Man. Not because the stars said so, because you saw me." Ilias's legs carried him forward before his mind caught up. He dropped to his knees in the snow beside her, his hands shaking as he gathered her into his arms. She felt impossibly light, fragile as a bird's bone, but warm, so warm. Her tiny fingers clutched his parka, her face buried against his neck. "You did it, kiddo," he choked out, his voice thick. "You saved us." Lyra shook her head against his chest. "We saved us?" She pulled back just enough to look at him, her purple eyes shimmering. "You stood in the snow. For me. That's what love is. Not stars, not rules. This." She pressed her small hand flat against his chest, right over his heartbeat. "Your heart, loud as thunder. Mine." The lead enforcer rose slowly. It picked up its cracked weapon, not threateningly, but almost reverently. "The bond is valid," it stated, its voice now calm, almost gentle. "You broke the programming. You awakened your soul. You are no longer a unit. You are free." It turned its masked face toward Elias. "And you, human, you saw her soul before her species. You chose her when all logic said to fear her. You are worthy." Elias held Lyra tighter, his throat too tight to speak. Worthy, he'd just tried not to soil his pants. But, looking at Lyra, her exhaustion, her courage, the fierce love in her eyes, he knew the enforcer wasn't wrong. This tiny being had chosen him, and he'd chosen her back, even when it meant standing against the sky itself. The enforcer raised its hand. Not a weapon. A small, smooth pod, glowing faint blue, floated down from the ship above. It landed softly, in the snow, at Ilias's feet. "A world seed," the enforcer said. "It grows a new home, wherever you wish. For the first awakened, for her chosen." It stepped back toward the light beam. "The stars watch you now. Lyra of Veilani. Choose wisely. In a flash of light, the enforcers and the beam vanished. The black ship rose silently, disappearing into the pale sky as if it had never been. Elias sat back on his heels in the snow. Lyra cradled in his arms. The tundra stretched empty and white around them. The only sound was the wind and Lyra's soft, steady breathing against his chest. He looked down at her. Her eyes were closed, but a small, peaceful smile touched her lips. Exhausted, safe, free. Gently, Elias brushed a stray snowflake from her cheek. "What now, kiddo?" he murmured. Lyra's eyes fluttered open. She reached up, her tiny hand covering his much larger one where it rested over her heart. "Now," she whispered, "we plant the seed." And for the first time since the sky cracked open, Elias Vansta, quiet biologist who studied foxes, felt the weight of the universe not as a burden, but as a promise. He held his tiny husband close, the world seed glowing softly at his feet, and knew home wasn't a place on a map. It was the fragile, fierce heartbeat against his chest. It was her. The wind carried away the last of the ship's shadow. In the clearing sky, the first stars began to twinkle, witnesses to a love that broke the stars. The snow felt different now, not just cold, but alive. Elias knelt in the tundra, the world seed glowing softly in his palm, a smooth, blue oval no bigger than a robin's egg, pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. Lyra leaned against his side, her small body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes fixed on the seed with fierce hope. The vast emptiness of the Arctic stretched around them. But here, in this circle of melted earth, the world felt small enough to hold. "Ready, kiddo?" Elias asked, his voice rough with emotion. Lyra nodded, her tiny fingers brushing the seed. "Dig," she whispered, "deep, like planting hope." Elias used his knife to carve a small hole in the dark soil beneath the snow. His hands were clumsy with cold and fear still lingering in his bones, but Lyra guided him. Her small hand covered his, steering the blade with surprising strength. "Gentle," she murmured. "It's a baby star." When the hole was ready, Elias placed the world seed inside. Lyra pressed her palms together, closed her eyes, and hummed the same resonant vibration that had healed his fever. A soft golden light spilled from her fingertips, sinking into the earth. The soil warmed beneath Elias's knees. He felt it, a thrumming energy, deep and ancient, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. They waited. Nothing happened. Hope flickered. What if it's broken? What if the enforcers lied? He glanced at Lyra. Her small shoulders were slumped, her breathing shallow. She'd given everything to stop the ship. He wrapped his parka tighter around her, tucking her against his chest. "It's okay, kiddo," he whispered. "We'll figure something out." Maybe then movement. A single green shoot, thin as thread, pushed through the soil. It grew fast, spiraling upward like a dancer catching the light. In seconds, it was taller. Then Elias's hand, then his arm. Leaves unfurled, not green, but shimmering silver, catching the weak Arctic sun and scattering it like prisms. The trunk thickened, smooth and pale blue, humming with that same warm energy Lyra had pulsed earlier. Roots spread through the earth, gentle but sure, as if embracing the frozen land. Lyra gasped, a sound of pure wonder. "It's singing." Elias heard it, too, a low, soothing hum, like wind through crystal chimes. The tree wasn't just growing. It was breathing. Warm air curled from its leaves, melting the snow in a perfect circle around its base. The cold that had haunted Elias for years, the cold of loneliness, of loss, began to thaw. "Come on," he said, lifting Lyra. "Let's see." Inside, the tree had formed a small dome, no taller than Elias's shoulder. Inside, the air was warm and sweet, smelling of rain and sunlight. The walls glowed softly, veins of blue light tracing the bark like constellations. Lyra wriggled from his arms and ran to the center, where a patch of moss grew, soft and golden. She turned to him, her purple eyes wide with joy. Our home. Elias sank to his knees, tears stinging his eyes. This wasn't just shelter. It was a sanctuary. The tree pulsed gently, as if welcoming them. He ran his hand over the inner walls. Smooth, warm, alive. It's beautiful, Lyra. Lyra climbed onto the moss, then patted the space beside her. Sit, big skyman, rest, he did. The moss cradled him like a mother's arms. Lyra curled against his side, her tiny body radiating warmth. You're tired, she murmured, placing her hand over his heart. Your thunder is slow. Long day, he admitted, his voice thick, but worth it. He looked around the glowing dome. This is perfect. Lyra shook her head, snuggling closer. Not perfect. Ours. She traced a finger over his knuckles. You gave me a home when I was lost. Now the tree gives us one. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know what Jarveth really means? Elias shook his head. Not husband, she said softly. It means the one who finds you in the dark. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening to his heartbeat. You found me, big skyman, not in the stars, in the snow. That's why I chose you. Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her, as if she might vanish. I'll never let you go, he promised. Not to anyone. Lyra looked up, her eyes shimmering. You already didn't. She pointed to the tree's glowing veins. See? Our hearts are in the light now. Together. Exhaustion hit her like a wave. Her eyelids fluttered shut, her breathing deepening into sleep. Elias held her, watching the silver leaves dance in the dome's gentle light. The wind howled outside, but in here, it was silent, except for the tree's soft hum and Lyra's steady breaths. He thought of the enforcer's words. You are worthy. Worthy of what? A tiny alien girl? A glowing tree in the snow? Then he understood. Worthy of this quiet moment, this fragile trust, this love that wasn't born of stars or rituals, but of two lost souls, choosing each other in the freezing dark. He wasn't just a biologist anymore. He was hers, and she was his. Lyra stirred in his arms, murmuring in her sleep, Kiddo. Elias smiled, brushing a strand of silver moss from her forehead. Yeah, kiddo, I'm here. Outside, the Arctic night deepened, but inside the tree, warmth spread like liquid sunlight. Elias closed his eyes, listening to Lyra's breathing, feeling the tree's gentle pulse against his back. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel small against the vastness of the world. He felt rooted. Like the tree, his roots had found soil. His branches reached for light, and his heart, once quiet, once lonely, now beat loud as thunder for the tiny being in his arms. Hours later, Lyra woke. She stretched like a cat, then scrambled up the tree's inner wall with surprising agility. At the highest point, she perched like a bird, gazing out through the dome at the starry sky. Look, big sky man, she called. The stars see us now. Elias joined her, lifting her onto his shoulders. Together, they watched the northern lights ripple above the tundra green and violet ribbons dancing over the snow. The tree hummed beneath them, a steady rhythm against the cold. Lyra turned, her face lit by the aurora. She pressed her small hands to his cheeks, her purple eyes serious. You know what I wish? What, kiddo? That tomorrow, she said, her voice soft but sure, we plant more seeds, so no one else gets lost in the dark. Elias pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Her skin smelled like snow and starlight. We will, he promised, starting tomorrow. As the lights shimmered above, Elias Vansaman, who once measured his life in fox tracks and frozen silence, held his daughter close, and in the glow of their impossible tree, he finally understood. Home wasn't a place on a map. It was the weight of a small body against your chest. It was the courage to plant a seed in the snow. It was choosing, every single day, to be someone's light in the dark, The stars watched, and for the first time, they didn't feel cold. Winter didn't stand a chance against the tree, where once only ice and howling wind ruled the Siberian tundra. A circle of warmth now breathed life into the frozen earth. The world's Eid Trinell, called Jarveth by Lyra, stood tall, its silver leaves shimmering like captured starlight, its roots humming with gentle heat. Inside its glowing dome, snow never settled. Moss grew soft and golden. The air smelled of rain and hope. Elias and Lyra weren't alone anymore. The first visitors came on foot, 3 scientists from a distant Arctic station, drawn by the unnatural warmth on their weather sensors. Elias met them at the tree's edge, shotgun slung over his shoulder, though he knew it was useless. Lyra perched on his hip like a gray-feathered bird. The scientists stared, wide-eyed, at the impossible oasis. Is that alive?" one stammered, touching the warm bark. Lyra leaned forward, her tiny hand outstretched. "Hello," she chimed, her voice like wind through crystal. "I am Lyra. This is my home, and my big skyman." She pointed proudly at Elias. The scientists froze, not with fear, but with awe. They'd expected wreckage. They found wonder. Elias let them in. Slowly, carefully, he showed them the tree's heart, a pulsing blue core, where Lyra's laughter made the light dance. He watched their faces as Lyra healed a frostbitten finger with a touch, her golden glow melting pain into peace. He saw the moment there, suspicion turned to reverence. Not for him, for her. "Your daughter," one scientist whispered, watching Lyra teach a snowflake to glow in her palm. Elias's chest tightened. "She's my family." Word spread, not through radios or satellites, but through breathless whispers in cold bunkhouses. "There's a living tree in the snow, and a star child who mends broken things." Soon, more came. Not soldiers, not enforcers, just people. Hunters with injured hands, doctors with broken hearts, children who'd never seen kindness in the endless white. All seeking shelter, all finding her. Lyra never turned anyone away. She'd sit cross-legged on the warm moss, her small hands resting on aching joints, her light pouring out like liquid sunlight. She'd hum the healing song, and tears would fall not from pain, but from the shock of being seen. One old trapper, his face scarred by decades of wind, wept openly when Lyra's touch eased the arthritis in his knuckles. "Haven't held my grandson's hand without pain in 20 years, he rasped, cradling her like a granddaughter. "You're a miracle, little one." Lyra just patted his cheek. "Miracles are just love with hands," she'd say, her purple eyes serious. "And my hands are yours." Elias watched it all, pride and fear tangled in his chest. What if they take her? What if they don't understand? But Lyra always found him climbing onto his lap, pressing her ear to his chest. "Your thunder is loud. Again, big skyman," she'd murmur. "Why?" "Because I love you," he'd admit, voice rough. "And I'm scared to lose you." Lyra would shake her head, her tiny fingers tracing the lines on his weathered face. "You never lose me. Look." She'd point to the tree's glowing veins, where 2 steady pulses shone side by side, one deep blue hers, one warm amber his. "Our hearts live in the light now, even when I'm with others." She'd kiss his stubbled cheek. "You are my Jarveth, my home finder, that never changes." One bitter morning a young woman arrived, shivering, her arms cradling a limp Arctic fox kit. Its leg was broken, its breathing shallow. "Please," she begged, tears freezing on her cheeks. "It's all I have left." Lyra didn't hesitate. She took the kit gently, her light flaring soft gold as she cradled it against her chest. For hours, she hummed, her small body glowing brighter with every note. Elias held her when her strength wavered, feeding her sips of warm broth, wiping sweat from her brow. Just as the sun dipped below the snow, the kit stirred, its leg mended, its black nose nuzzling Lyra's chin. The woman sobbed, clutching both kit and child. How can I ever? Thank you. Lyra smiled wearily, her eyes half closed. Plant a seed, she whispered, wherever you go, so no one feels lost. That night, as the northern lights painted the sky, Elias carried Lyra to the highest branch of Jarveth. Below, the dome glowed with the quiet presence of sleeping guests, a hunter snoring softly, a child curled in moss, the fox kit purring at Lyra's feet. You did good today, kiddo, Elias murmured, tucking her thermal blanket around her. Lyra leaned into him, her exhaustion deep, but her spirit bright. They needed light, she said simply. Then she turned, her amethyst eyes searching his face. Big Sky Man, am I still yours? Even with so many people loving me now? Elias's heart cracked open. He cupped her small face, his thumb brushing her cool cheek. Listen to me, he said, voice thick. You were never mine like a thing. You're mine like the sky is mine because I breathe it, because it holds me up, because I choose it every single day. He pressed his forehead to hers. No one else gets to call you kiddo. No one else gets to hold you when the thunder in your heart gets too loud. That's our magic. Lyra's eyes filled with glowing tears. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his scarf. Then you listen, she whispered fiercely. I chose you in the snow. I choose you with the scientists. I choose you with the trappers and the foxes and the whole cold world. She pulled back, her small hand slapping his chest right over his heart. This is mine, always, even when I'm healing others, especially then. A silence settled between them, deeper than the Arctic night. Below, the tree hummed. Above, the aurora danced. Then Lyra grinned, the mischief back in her eyes. She scrambled onto Elias's shoulders, pointing at the swirling greens and violets. Look, the stars are clapping for us. Elias laughed a sound he hadn't made in years. He held her ankles as she reached for the sky, her tiny fingers almost brushing the dome's light. For a moment, she looked less like a child and more like what she was, Lyra of Violani, the first awakened, the bridge between worlds. But then she turned, her smile softening into something only he ever saw. She slid down his back, curling against his chest like she did that first day in the snow. Congratulations, husband, she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. Another day together. Elias held her close, rocking gently as the northern lights kissed the dome. Outside, the tundra stretched vast and empty. But here in this cradle of light and love he wasn't just a biologist. He wasn't just a guardian. He was home, and home, he finally understood, wasn't a place you found. It was a promise you kept, every single day. Years later, the snow still fell on Siberia, but the tundra was no longer silent. Where once only wolves howled, now laughter rang clear as bells. The Jarveth tree stood taller than a house, its silver leaves shimmering under the northern lights, its roots warming an entire village. Homes built of ice and wood clustered around it, smoke curling from chimneys like friendly ghosts. Scientists came not to study, but to learn. Hunters brought gifts of dried fish and furs. Children played in the snow. Chasing glowing fireflies, Lyra coaxed from the tree's branches. And at the heart of it all, Lyra grew not in height, but in spirit. She was still small enough to fit in Ilias's palm, but her presence filled the world. Her gray skin held a soft, constant glow now, like moonlight on water. Her purple eyes saw everything, the ache in an old woman's bones, the fear in a child's silence, the unspoken grief in a man's tired shoulders. She healed with a touch, yes, but more often, she healed with a word, a song, a tiny hand placed gently over a beating heart. Elias watched her from the porch of their cabin, built against the tree's warm trunk. His hair was silver now, his face carved deep by wind and worry and joy. He wasn't just Big Sky Man anymore. To the village, he was Elias of the light. To the world beyond the snow, He was the man who held a star child's hand and taught humanity how to love something other. One evening, as the aurora painted the sky violet and green, Lyra found him. She climbed onto his lap, like she did when she was tiny, though now his knees creaked under her weight. Her small hand pressed against his chest, feeling the familiar rhythm. "Your thunder is slow today, husband," she murmured. Elias covered her hand with his own, rough and warm. "Just tired, kiddo. Long day." Lyra tilted her head, her amethyst eyes seeing past the words. "You worry about the sky." He didn't deny it. 4 months, strange lights had pulsed in the upper atmosphere, silent, watchful. The Veilani were back, not to take to sea. That night, they came, not with a ship that blocked the sun, but with a single, gentle light, soft as a falling star. It touched down at the edge of the village, revealing 3 enforcers, but they came without armor, without weapons. Their masks were gone, revealing faces like Lyra's gray skin, luminous eyes, expressions full of quiet wonder. The village gathered, silent and still. Elias stood at the front, Lyra perched on his shoulder. The lead enforcer, being with eyes like liquid gold, stepped forward. It didn't speak. It bowed deeply, its forehead nearly touching the snow. "Lyra of Veilani," it finally said, its voice a whisper on the wind. The first awakened. The bridge. It gestured to the village, the warm homes, the children laughing, the Jarveth tree pulsing with life. "You built this with love." Lyra slid down Ilias's arm, landing lightly in the snow. She walked to the enforcer, not as a child, but as an equal. She placed her tiny hand on its much larger one. "Not just me," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "All of us. He taught me. They taught me. Love isn't written in stars. It's written here." She tapped her chest, then the enforcers. In the space between heartbeats, the enforcer's golden eyes shimmered. "Our people, we forgot. We became cold, efficient. We called souls programming." It looked at Elias, then at the village. "You showed us the truth. Love isn't a ritual. It's a choice, made every day." Lyra turned and ran back to Elias. She climbed his leg, up to his chest, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "This is my choice," she declared, her voice ringing clear. "This man, this home, this family." She pointed to the villagers. "All of them. I choose them, every single day." The enforcer nodded slowly. "Then we choose you, Lyra of Veilani, not as property, as people." It raised its hand. A single world seed, glowing like a captured sunrise, floated down. "Plant this where your heart is needed most. We will follow, not to take, to learn." As the light lifted them away, Elias held Lyra close. The village erupted in quiet cheers, but he only heard the soft thud of her heart against his own. Later, under the dancing aurora, they climbed the highest branch of Jarveth. Below, the village slept, warm and safe. Above, the stars burned cold and bright. Lyra nestled against Ilias's chest, her small body humming with the tree's gentle light. "They called me the bridge," she whispered. "But I'm not a bridge, husband." Elias stroked her hair, silver in the starlight. "What are you then?" She looked up, her eyes reflecting the northern lights. "I'm the reason they crossed." She pressed her ear to his chest, listening to his heartbeat, the same thunder that had calmed her fear in the snow so long ago. "You found me broken in the ice. You chose me when the whole universe said I was just a thing." Her voice dropped to a breath. "That's the real magic, Big Skyman. Not the light in my chest." This she covered his heart with her hand. "You taught them what it means to be human." Elias felt tears warm his cheeks. "No, kiddo, you taught me." Lyra smiled, that same smile she'd given him the day the sky cracked open. She reached up, her tiny fingers tracing the lines on his face, lines carved by wind and worry and love. Then, just like that first day in the snow, she whispered the words that changed everything. Congratulations, husband. Another day together. Elias held her as the aurora swirled above them, green ribbons weaving through violet fire. He thought of the tiny pod in the snow, the fear, the impossible choice, the way this fragile being had mended his broken world with nothing but trust and a glowing heart. He looked down at her, his daughter, his teacher, his light in the endless dark. Her eyes were closed, her breathing deep and peaceful. The village slept below. The stars watched, no longer cold, but full of promise. In that moment, Elias understood. Humanity wasn't found in strength, or ships, or even in saving the world. It was found in the quiet choice to hold a tiny, trembling hand in the snow. In the courage to say you're mine when the universe said, let go. In the simple, daily act of whispering, congratulations. Another day together. He kissed Lyra's forehead, breathing in the scent of snow and starlight. The aurora dipped low, brushing the trees' leaves with color, and as the northern lights danced over the sanctuary they'd built, one heartbeat, one choice, one tiny act of love. At a time Elias Vance knew the truth. The stars had whispered all along. Sometimes, the smallest hearts hold the greatest love, and that was enough to move worlds.